The White Sox have actually done something right. They don't have many bad contracts on their books. But at the same time, it represents them doing something bad, not spending enough to compete.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan. I've been podcasting here for over a year and a half. Been covering the team well before then. And also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to discuss how Andrew Benintendi's contract being considered the team's only bad deal is actually good for the rebuild, but another reason to brace for scrutiny down the road. Then let's discuss a couple of moves you want two division rivals to make in the offseason. And finally, let's discuss how the White Sox prospects playing in the Arizona Fall League did in the first week on this week's Minor League Monday Report. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. All right, so we all know Andrew Benintendi's franchise record free agent contract is bad. We know that. It's an albatross. It's also bad because it was only for $78 million. That's a franchise record. Okay, $78 million. And that should not be a franchise record when Benintendi has always just been a run-of-the-mill player. Decent, solid guy. Has a couple of years where he hit 20 home runs for Boston. Another year where he hit 300. But otherwise, just an average run-of-the-mill player. Now, $78 million is the market for that guy. But at the same time, that should not be your franchise record. Your franchise record should have been outspending the San Diego Padres for Manny Machado. But this team has never paid the going rate for premium talent, which is over $100 million. And this owner, he just doesn't want to hand out those deals because that's not how it was in 1958. But at the same time, being cheap may have set up the White Sox for having the ability to pursue free agents or trade for premium players in 2027 or 2028, when hopefully this team is ready to compete for the AL Central and for the playoffs. Because, man, these playoffs have been great. They've been fun to watch. And it makes you think it would be fantastic if the White Sox were in it. It would be nice to see the White Sox compete for the playoffs instead of, hey, they improved by 19 games, which was still bad because they went from 41 wins to 60 wins. And having two for sure payroll commitments in Benintendi and Luis Robert Jr. is actually a reason to be a little annoyed that this is going to be a quiet offseason still. Because again, those are the only two major payroll commitments they're going to have this going into the offseason. Because they are, like it or not, going to exercise Andrew Benintendi's $20 million, Luis Robert Jr.'s $20 million option. And yet they're not going to pursue Kyle Schwarber or Pete Alonso or Josh Naylor or even a higher tier starting pitching free agent this offseason. We'll probably have to settle for a couple $5 million starting for, starting pitchers in that $5 million range, maybe a reliever like in that Bryce Wilson range again. It's probably going to be a copy of last offseason. But part of it is you are in phase 2, so you don't want to be blocking too many of these still young prospects. But it would be nice to see that, hey, there is a offseason where you have some needs that you could fill with some impact free agents and accelerate your rebuild timeline because you don't have any major payroll commitments. And those are technically some prudent shortcuts. Obviously you don't want to take too many shortcuts if you want to have sustained success. And that's one of the reasons why the last rebuild failed. Too many shortcuts, let's just pile up a lot of guys with high ceilings. We're going to not pay attention to the fact that they might be one-trick ponies and Eloy Jimenez. We're not going to pay attention to their work ethic like Yohan Moncada. We're just going to get a lot of high ceiling guys. And then when they don't hit it, it's what we're seeing right now. And I think, maybe you can be annoyed, but at the same time, having payroll flexibility gives them the opportunity to have, hopefully, money to pursue a much better group of free agents next offseason. Tariq Skubal, who I'll talk about in the second segment, Freddie Peralta. Those are going to be some starters that could be on the free agent market that could be like that John Lester type signing. Because again, going back to the last rebuild, they never got basically their John Lester. They thought, they went cheap with Lance Lynn and Dallas Keuchel, but that wasn't going to complete your rebuild. Go get that frontline starter on the free agent market. And I know you're saying, Todd, Jerry Reinsdorf is the owner. Don't worry. We'll talk about him in a second. But if the White Sox have another great draft and get the internal improvement next season from the young core, they might be armed then going into the 2027 season, that off season in 2026, 2027 to make a splash trade as a buyer with some of that excess prospects that helps, a team get back to being a contender. But this is where the scrutiny comes in. It's hard to see it happening because A, we don't know what the next collective bargaining agreement will look like. But also, new ownership will not be in place until maybe 2029. And I doubt Jerry Reinsdorf is really going to commit the payroll resources to win one more World Series before he leaves. And yes, you've got to commit payroll resources because per Just Baseball, this is what the payrolls you need just to get to a championship series. This is what they tweeted out. This is at JustBB_media. I've got the tweet up for those watching on YouTube. Payroll rankings among the 4 championship series teams. Dodgers first, $350 million. Blue Jays fifth, $255 million. Mariners 15th, $165 million. Brewers 22nd, $122 million. You can't be spending $82 million and expect to win a playoff series. I mean, of all the playoff teams, only the Guardians spent the least, and it was $100 million. So looks like it's the difference between 60 wins and even winning a division is $18 million. And we know the White Sox want to be a pitching factory. And we all know how much Jerry would still love to win a World Series on the cheap way. So this is the other thing where the scrutiny is. Ask yourself, based on what the team has in the system right now, and just take out the hype, view it objectively in terms of players are going to have their ups and downs. There's going to be some injuries. There's regression. But just think, no potential free agents, potentially, major free agent impacts being added. I kind of went around and kicked around what could the next competitive team look like. And for example, this is what the 2027 lineup would be. I got the bullpen highlights. I got Vassell, Leisure, Winkelman Gonzalez, Brandon Iser, Peyton Pallette, Kai Busch, Tyler Schweitzer, because Venable seems to love having 3 lefties. The starters, I would have Caleb Bonemer. And again, I think the White Sox have done a good job of getting guys to the big leagues maybe a year ahead of what MLB pipeline projects. But, I would have Jarrell Perez or Kyle Teal splitting time and left. But you're basically going to have to find somebody in center. And that's why I have maybe you trading Luis Robert Jr., Lenine Sosa, Corey Lee, or Davis Martin, a combination of those trades to maybe get a center fielder into the future. Or again, that would be where you need to complete your rebuild. And again, this is just throwing it out there, that type of stuff. Or what about the 2028 to 2029 lineup? This is where I added Billy Carlson and Jaden Fowsky playing left. I moved Jarrell Perez to DH with his power bat. Again, do you think that this team needs to spend a little bit more money? And then I put the 2026 first round pick because if it's Justin LeBron or Rock Tuwalski, those are shortstops. Those are guys that you're going to always move to center. But again, you got to ask yourself, is this enough, even if they don't spend a ton of money and maybe they give an extension out to win a World Series, to compete for the AL Central, at least for the division, because that's what we're all banking on. And I'm excited for these young kids. But again, we've seen how injuries can derail and stagnation can derail and regression can derail. That's why it's like, take this opportunity before the new CBA is hammered out and spend some money because you don't have, terrible contracts on your books right now. Well, the path to competing for a division championship by the end of the decade could become even clearer if a couple of elite players are shipped out this offseason. And let's discuss that after the break. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss right now. New customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel gives you so many ways to play. You can build parlays. You can try player props. You can even follow the live lines during the games. FanDuel just makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. And I've always been saying FanDuel's traditional money lines, the over-unders, and the spreads are fun to play. But if you want to win big money or at least double or triple your cash, play the parlays, the props, or the futures. Like for tonight's Washington and Chicago game, they are offering a same-game parlay of Rome Odunze, DeAndre Swift, Jakari Krosky-Merritt, and Deebo Samuel, all scoring an anytime touchdown. That is at plus 2240 the last time I checked. So if you put, say, $10 on that and it hits, you can win $224.08. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, you can get the audio version of the show on places such as Apple or Spotify. So make sure to follow or subscribe at wherever you get your podcasts. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me, and maybe some hope. And also make sure to check out my written content at SouthsideSox.com, on Tap Sportsnet, and at Fans First Sports Network. And I've got a piece up about how Andrew Vaughn was never going to be the king of Chicago. And that's on SouthsideSox.com. And I kind of want to give ourselves a break from Andrew Vaughn. I mean, again, I appreciate your service, Andrew. Attaboy for helping eliminate the Cubs. But, done a couple shows last week on Andrew Vaughn. Probably going to do some more if he keeps up this heroics. But figured let's focus on some White Sox business. Although we're going to need the Detroit Tigers to cheap out if the White Sox do want to, hopefully get back to being competitive in the AL Central by 2027 or 2028. Let's hope that they decide, we don't want to pay Tariq Skubal and deal him like the Brewers did with Corbin Burns in 2024. Why not take the prospects close to the big league level? Detroit, do that. Because you don't have the pitching except for Tariq Skubal. Although, the reason why I'm encouraging that is, again, they don't have the pitching like Milwaukee had to basically say, we don't need Corbin Burns anymore. Yeah, we're not going to pay him. Let's get Joey Ortiz and DL Hall, who's always injured, and let's even take an extra draft pick. Detroit's pitching, they thought they had all this depth, and it's either been injured like Jackson Joby, and Mize has not really turned out to be much. So that's why I say go for it. And how about, hey, the Cubs are now out, and actually, I am bracing for the Cubs to potentially compete for the World Series next year if they make like a few moves. They're probably not going to make at least the first two moves that I think could definitely put them over the top. And that's re-sign Kyle Tucker. And then, again, trade for, like, say, Joe Ryan out of Minnesota or Skubal. They won't do that. But even still, like, if they don't get a regression from PCA, Cade Horton stays healthy and continues his ascension, and they keep together most of that bullpen that they built, through the trade deadline and some shrewd moves like getting something out of Brad Keller. And, they could be, and, Matt Shaw, if he even gets to a 2 F4 player, they definitely have a chance to compete for the World Series. But if it gets Joe Ryan or Tariq Skubal out of the division, I might have to be like, okay. Because even though you might be saying, well, Todd, like, say if Ryan is traded, that could help the Twins rebuild. I said it on Friday's show. I'm prepared for the White Sox and Twins to have the rebuilds hopefully bear fruit at the end of the decade. I am fully prepared that if everything goes to chalk, like we're all crossing our fingers, and probably Minnesota Twin fans are too, that the White Sox and Twins will be battling it out for the division. But I just want the White Sox to get a head start. And that's right. I am rooting for the AL Central to be weaker, in 2026 and 2027. Let's get Skubal out of the division. Let's get Ryan out of there. Maybe even Brian Buxton out of there. Let's get him out too. Come on, Minnesota. I mean, you're not going anywhere anytime soon. Get some more pieces. Add to that top 5 prospect system. Detroit, again, you need more arms. You need more young arms. Leverage Skubal's 1 year of club control for at least another young potential ace. That takes a few years to emerge because it did take Skubal a little bit of time. But the other thing is think about how fast this division went from being powerful to just potentially falling apart. I mean, last year I was doing a show where I thought the White Sox would be at the bottom of the Central for years to come. Because think about it, you had the Tigers, the Guardians, the Royals, all making the playoffs. And they all looked like they were going to duke it out for the rest of the decade, along with the Twins, if they made some moves. But what happened? Twins fell apart, and they tore it all down. And the Royals, they might have shown they were only a playoff team because they just feasted actually off the White Sox historic losing season. Because the White Sox went from only beating the Royals one time to at least being able to beat them at Wright Field. They still can't beat them at Kauffman Stadium, but that ballpark is a house of horrors for them. The Guardians, well, they lost some key pitching to gambling stings, allegedly, and they always sell off in the offseason. They traded Josh Naylor away. And, when I talk to the guys at Locked On Guardians, some of the times their returns haven't panned out. And the Tigers, well, they still have a talented lineup, but their pitching beyond Skubal isn't exactly one that's going to dominate the AL Central. I mean, you saw how their pitching came apart down the stretch. It's one of the reasons why they snuck into the playoffs after blowing a 10-game lead. So, heck yeah, I want to see Skubal go anywhere. But, it's going to be tough if it's, say, the Chicago Cubs. Because, like I said, if they decide to push their chips into the center for Skubal or Ryan, or both, because they should wake up and realize, oh my gosh, we're making money hand over fist. Wrigley Field in that area is a license to, it's basically a license to print money. Let's go act like the Dodgers. That's the other thing. I mean, two things I sympathize with Cub fans for. Number one, I've always sympathized with how the Wrigleyville neighborhood basically dictates like they can't have night games on a Friday and Saturday night. I've always wanted to be like, that ballpark was there well before you moved in. And it's still just as noisy and crowded when the Cubs aren't playing on a Friday and Saturday night. I know, I've been there many times, frequented many bars, Murphy's Bleachers and Sluggers when the Cubs aren't even in town. And guess what? There is a crowd of people there. So just deal with it. And then the other thing is just, Tom Ricketts deciding I'm going to just be just as lazy and, count my money owner as like Jerry Reinsdorf and just as, oblivion now as the McCaskies. So I do sympathize because, I mean, man, Chicago sports just has terrible, terrible ownership. But say they do go get those pitchers. I mean, they could be looking at winning a World Series on the 10th anniversary of snapping their curse. So, I would have to weigh, if the Cubs decided to do that, yes, you would have Skubal out of the division, but he's on the north side of town. That would be kind of a nightmare situation. So that's why it's like, I would love for him to go, Skubal or Ryan to go to 27 other teams. I mean, heck, it would even be great if the White Sox dared to dream, but it's not going to happen because it's within the division. But at least get Ryan and Skubal out of the AL Central. Well, White Sox top 10 pitching prospect Hagen Smith didn't give up a run in his first Arizona Fall League start. Let's discuss how he and the rest of the White Sox playing in this league did during the first week of game action. That's coming up after the break. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. And if you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. And I love Monarch Money because it helps me track my investments in my 401k and Roth IRA. As you know, I would love to retire someday. And my wife loves Monarch Money because it makes doing the budget so easy and less stressful. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONMLB. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. wherever they get their podcasts. This show's available on all major podcast platforms. Hope you had a good weekend. Mine was relatively low key. Watched the Brewers Cubs playoff game, watched some college football, and then watched Red Zone, for the most part. So, and did have cranked out a piece on SouthsideSox.com about, again, how Andrew Vaughn was never going to be king of Chicago. So, and I kind of linked it back to kind of what I talked about on Friday's episode as well. Well, Hagen Smith had a huge accomplishment in his first Arizona Fall League start. The former first-round pick did not give up a run in 3 innings of work, and that's impressive considering it's a hitter's league, And he was considered one of the top performers of the week per MLB Pipeline's Joe Trezza. And, if he can throw up some zeros, you got to like his chances of bouncing back, next season from that inconsistent 2025 season he had at AA Birmingham. And here's what Trezza had to write about his 3-inning outing, where he allowed just 3 hits, struck out 4, but did walk 2. The number 5 overall pick in the 2024 draft and one of the top left-handed pitching prospects in the minors, Smith's first pro season was interrupted by a sore elbow in May, and he took 6 weeks off during the summer to work on his mechanics, hence his inclusion in the Fall League, where the White Sox hope he can make up for some of that lost time. Smith got off to a fast start in his debut, punching out 4 across 3 scoreless innings behind a fastball that touched 97 miles per hour and a slider that showed serious bite. His progress, particularly his ability to iron out some control issues, will be a storyline to watch this fall. And then MLB Pipeline's Jim Callis, he had a bit more detail on how the outing went, and I want to share some of those paragraphs that he wrote here. Hagen Smith provided 3 scoreless innings in his Arizona Fall League debut for the Glendale Desert Dogs on Wednesday night, yet he wasn't completely satisfied. The number 5 overall pick in the 2024 draft by the White Sox, one of the top left-handed pitching prospects in the minors, Smith battled his control and command at times and threw 20 balls among his 48 pitches. At the same time, the White Sox number 5 prospects, fastball and slider, overmatched the surprise Seguros, who later rallied from an 8-1 deficit for a wild 11-10 victory in 10 innings. Smith's fastball averaged 95 miles per hour and touched 97, generating 4 called strikes, 3 resulting in strikeouts, and 7 swings and misses. His sharp slider ranged from 81 to 85 miles per hour, creating 4 called strikes and 4 empty swings. One indicator of the nastiness of his stuff was that his overall called swinging strike percentage was 40%, while the MLB leader this year, minimum 50 innings, was the Padres' Mason Miller at 36%. Quote, I put up zeros, so I took that away from it, but my stuff was a little here and there, Smith said. The slider was just kind of pulling off a little bit at times. There was some good ones, some bad ones, but overall I thought it was decent. I'm still working on my command every day. I've been working on it since high school and now in pro ball, just kind of battling through some stuff. I'll just keep working on my command and hopefully it gets better, end quote. And you see, getting 3 scoreless innings, especially in a game that finished with 11-10 final, is encouraging because, again, it's a hitter's league at the Arizona Fall League. And at the same time, though, I love him, not being satisfied. I love him, hey, I got to focus on my command, because command is going to be the deciding factor between him being the next great left-handed starter that the White Sox have that hopefully this time they don't trade away, or him being Carson Fulmer, because he just had way too many walks at AA this past season. And I know his stuff can be nasty, but he's got to find ways to throw more strikes and cut down on those free passes. And since he lost so much time due to that elbow issue in the Arizona reset, I'm glad he's getting this time now in the AFL to, make up for some of those innings he lost out on. Now, Connor McCullough, he was the only other White Sox pitching prospect to throw last week. He pitched 2 2/3 innings. He allowed a solo home run, but he also struck out 4. And you might be wondering, who the heck is Connor McCullough and why is he in the Arizona Fall League? Because, again, the White Sox only get to send, I think, like 8 prospects. Because, again, it's a mashup. It's pretty much, if I remember, it's like 4 teams or 5 teams, but it's a mashup. I think it's like the Reds and the Dodgers and the Rays and the White Sox, and I think the Guardians. They get to send a certain amount of players to this league that, lasts for about, 5 weeks. And FutureSox.net kind of broke it down about like who you send, why you send it, and what are they going to get out of it. And I kind of want to share what FutureSox.net had in terms of why Connor McCullough is there or who the heck he is. So who is he? The White Sox signed McCullough as a UDFA out of Kansas State in 2022. He threw 113 innings in 2023, mostly in A-ball. The 6'1", 185-pound righty only threw 13 innings in 2024, before undergoing Tommy John surgery. It was a long rehab process, but the 25-year-old returned to the mound this past season. In 2025, the righty threw 42 innings in the system with a 3.43 ERA and struck out 39 while walking 10. What does McAuliffe need to work on? McAuliffe just needs to pitch and rack up some innings in whatever role he serves for the squad in Glendale. Why is he there? Connor McAuliffe has missed a lot of time while recovering from Tommy John surgery. He needs some innings, and the White Sox are sending him to the Arizona Fall League to make up for some of those innings. He's also Rule 5 eligible in this December, and that's another thing that sometimes teams that want to make a final decision on whether they need to put this guy on the 40-man roster, they'll send him to the Arizona Fall League. You'll also send guys to the Arizona Fall League to showcase them for potential trades, that type of stuff. And in terms of the hitters that the White Sox have at the Arizona Fall League, Sam Antonacci, he went 4 for 15 with 4 runs scored, 5 RBIs, 2 doubles, 2 walks, and he is considered the White Sox 11th best prospect per MLB Pipeline. And again, he's a guy that I'm hopeful could eventually be the everyday second baseman, just because, why did I have Chase Mindroth, for example, in the first segment in the utility role? It's just Sam Antonacci might have a better bat-to-ball skills in terms of actually being able to hit better. I think his hit profile is a little bit more. I mean, Mindroth has the ability to draw walks and the on base. It's just, can he hit, because right now he is hitting to where he ain't. Can he actually then adjust to once the adjustments are made, or when the defense kind of adjusts to, okay, let's take away this gap and that type of stuff. So that's a bar he's got to clear. And I'm not saying that I'm completely out on Chase Mindroth. I'm just saying he's already established his floor, and that is he's a big league player. But is he an everyday big league player? And I just get this feeling that Sam Antonacci might be the better big league player, and that's why he might be your starting second baseman in terms of providing that bat-to-ball skills. I mean, obviously, you'd love to have power up and down the lineup at right field, but we all know sometimes power can go on droughts. That's why I've always said the White Sox need at least 3 guys that have good bat-to-ball skills, that can get on base, that can run the base as well, that can still produce runs when you need it. First baseman Ryan Galaney, he got into 2 games last week. He went 3 for 7 with 2 RBIs. And then Caden Connor, he got into 3 games. He went 4 for 8 with 3 RBIs and 5 walks. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night until World Series champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. I'll be back tomorrow with your mailbag questions and comments, so make sure to get those into lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com, or you can leave them at X, formerly Twitter, at LockedOnSox or at ToddJDub, or you can always comment on the episode page on YouTube or in the community page as well. Also, make sure to like today's episode on YouTube or leave a 5-star review at wherever you get your podcasts. Have a great day, and I will talk to you tomorrow.